with that, I think we're probably ready to get just about started. As a reminder, you all have a chat button, and we would really love for you to use it today. Also, as a reminder, I don't know if this screenshot is still accurate anymore, but Zoom may prompt you to either choose chat to all panelists, which means that just Claire, we, Mark, and myself can see your message, or to choose all panelists and attendees. It's up to you which one you pick, but do you want to, just say something to us, or do you want to share with the rest of the community, which is what we would encourage? So please choose all panelists and attendees. It might say everyone instead, whatever that option is, please pick it, and let's communicate with one another and share our experiences. Okay, so today's going to be a pretty interesting topic, but before we get there, we need to stamp this thing out. And as we saw, for those of you that joined us really early today, we almost had an incident where not only did Patrick Carroll replicate among people, Patrick Carroll videos almost started replicating as well, where we were going to have 200 presenters on today's webinar, which would have been really, really odd. Okay, so I want to share some stats with you. This is what our Patrick Carroll infection rate has looked like over the past few weeks. On August 5th, 61% of you were Patrick Carroll. That number dropped to 28%, so we had a really, really, really good improvement over that 2-week period. But in the subsequent 2 weeks, it only got a little bit better. We went from 28 to 26, so we're certainly not out of the woods yet. And we have no idea what that number is today. So what I need you all to do in just a few moments is to use that chat button, select everyone when you do the chat, and I'm going to ask you to type out your name. But before you do that, well, actually, no, let's just go ahead and do it now because we're going to run out of time otherwise. So this is going to be part of our inoculation process. Please, everyone, no exceptions, use chat right now and type your full real name, and we can then sort of match up the Patrick Carrolls with the people that are not supposed to be Patrick Carroll. So let's take a minute. However, if you have a really long name with 5 words in it, take all the time you need, hit chat, type your full name, and this will help us identify who has the virus. And then over the course of the next few days, we may reach out to you individually to help you figure out a way to make yourself not Patrick Carroll anymore. But
I did notice someone mentioning booster shots. I had to just go get mine. If you delete your current webinar information in your calendar and re-sign up at our website, you will be immediately fully vaccinated, and you will become whoever you actually are, and if you use that link. So
that's our booster right there. Okay.
That's our booster.
I think it's funny because I was just going to say that the person who mentioned booster shots was actually Patrick Carroll. So I think that's fascinating.
So I know it works instantly.
But so can you believe the infected person when they're telling you what to do? That's a good question. But we will get this sorted out because we would hate to mislabel everyone. So again, if you haven't had a chance to yet, please type your full name into chat right now. And we'll give you a chance to do this one more time at the end for people that are joining us after the fact. Okay. So we want to start by letting you know about a few. Many of you are already using Report Pro, which is sort of our all-you-can-eat environment for thousands of different reports with hundreds of new reports published every year, a couple dozen new reports published every month. And we wanted to highlight just a few of the new ones that you may want to check out when you're in the interface. So one is the mid-year trends report that Mike shared some information, that Mike Renee shared some information on during the last webinar. It's fantastic. It's 140 pages of all the trends that really matter, not just coming out of COVID, but going forward too. And it's in presentation-ready format. So if you want to do an internal presentation in your company or to customers or to someone else, it gives you everything that you need. We also have a great new report on ghost kitchens and virtual brands and how pretty much anything can come from a ghost kitchen these days and how that has evolved over the course of the last year and continues to be more new, more different, even than where it was just 365 days ago. The new food values deep dive, this is a bigger keynote that talks about how consumers are making choices about food, whether, where they shop, what restaurants they go to, what they choose off the menu based on their own personal values, and how brands can align with consumers' own personal values to become part of that consideration set. We think this is really important, and it's only going to be getting bigger and bigger. But there's just a ton of stuff in Report Pro. Again, brand new reports published almost every single day of the year, and we invite you to investigate. But if you wanted to start with a few really good ones and you're already in the environment, those are 3 that you may want to check out right away. Okay, I wanted to maybe start with just a poll that, I don't know, I think this is, someone asked me this question the other day, and it sort of blew my mind because I never really thought of it that way. And he said, hey, Jack, are we still going to be talking about COVID every single day 3 years from now? And I actually don't know what the answer is. So I would like to hear yours. So within 3 years, will COVID still be a major daily topic of conversation where we're talking about, vaccination or masks or, an outbreak or something, the same way that we're talking about it now? Or do you think it just becomes sort of a memory, like something you talk about as though we're in the past tense? Without trying to bias the response, Mark, Claire, any thoughts on what you think people are answering right now? What does the split look like?
Let me see. I can't see the results yet, but
you can't. So yeah, so you're taking a guess. So in 2024, we're coming up on Thanksgiving or Christmas 2024. Is COVID still going to be a daily topic of conversation? A major daily?
I think so.
I think so. Maybe 60% saying yes. I don't know. That's just a guess, obviously.
Okay, so you both say more would say yes. What do you think?
Yeah, I think so too.
So the good news is, well, I guess bad news for you is you're wrong. The good news, I guess, is that our attendees are a little more optimistic, where it actually flipped 60% in the opposite direction. I have no idea what's going to happen in 3 years, but the fact that we have to actually extend our horizon out that far in itself is fairly interesting. Okay. So, Mark, do you want to maybe share a little background on just what's happened with consumers' concern around COVID over the last year and a half, and more recently in the last couple of months?
Yeah, of course. I think as we've seen over the past year and a half, these numbers tend to really follow events and kind of news of the virus. And so this was the case again, where as we were sort of recovering from the shock we saw kind of last month, when the hospitalizations and new cases from the Delta variant really did start to shoot up, in lots of different markets, that really did cause us to backtrack a lot in the good feelings we were having over the summer. Through the spring, as the vaccination rollout was really gaining steam and before it kind of plateaued, we really were looking forward to a summer back to normal. I mean, we were all kind of planning to maybe go see shows again, maybe travel and see people we haven't seen in a while again. But in the past month, there was a spike at the end of last month, and we got a little bit of our confidence back, but concerns are still elevated, I think, from where we thought we would be right now.
Yeah. And this translates somewhat also into whether people are avoiding eating out, although it's not a direct correlation with people's concern about COVID, right? The level of concern sort of has gone up, gone down, sort of somewhere in the middle to the lower middle currently, as Mark just showed. But if you look at whether people are saying, hey, I'm definitely trying to not eat out, we're almost at a historic low during the COVID period, which is where we were already headed until Delta happened. You can see a spike in July, but we've now receded from that spike, and the hope is that we can get into the low 20s or maybe sub 20 at some point in the future. Now, there is talk about other variants and whatnot too. I feel like unless something really dramatic happens, those won't have the same sort of freak out effect that we had with Delta, right? Because we'll have sort of been through that a little bit already. And you can see that with this chart overall, that just because infections went up at some point, we never got back up to the 60% plus numbers that we saw earlier on last year, where people just were not willing to eat out at all. We've sort of, normalized our behavior a little bit. I think we'll probably be a little bit less sensitive relative to eating out if something else emerges in the future, but we'll see.
Yeah, but Jack, if you look, between March and April, that was kind of the one time we had a real significant spike downward.
Yep.
And that kind of coincided with the vaccine rollout. So,
Yeah.
Our time horizon is probably elongated here, where it may take us longer than we thought to get to that 20% or sub 20% level. I'm just speculating, but I think the only thing that could maybe cause another kind of downward spike, in the long-term trend would be if we finally approve the vaccine for kids younger than 12. I feel like I think that's what a lot of people are waiting for. I certainly am, as a parent of kids younger than 12.
And we've seen an interesting flip-flop and reversal of the notion of this COVID being primarily a public health crisis versus an economic crisis. Do you want to talk about the trend line here, Mark?
Yeah, for the much of the duration of the crisis, we were way more concerned about the public health effects than the kind of follow-on economic effects. That gap started narrowing, this year. Once we got past the really scary numbers from January, people started to get inoculated. And so we were seeing a pretty steady convergence of those numbers, and they finally crossed over kind of around the same time that we all thought we might have been out of the woods. We gave a lot of that progress back, but now I think we're still kind of going in a bit of the wrong direction, where we don't have as good a handle on the public health crisis as we thought we did.
Yep. So we're going to dive into just a few of the real important highlights from some of the more recent reporting we've done in some of our Report Pro content on vaccine mandates, both from a consumer and an operator perspective. But we want to start with some of the consumer insights first. And I wanted to just maybe offer a little bit of a disclaimer, which is we've waded into some fairly controversial topics during the course of this webinar series, which goes all the way back to March of last year. We had an episode just on the election, even, for instance. I don't think we've ever put out a statement saying, hey, let's be careful what we say in chat, but I am going to actually issue that today, which is, let's talk about the data, let's talk about what the implications are, let's talk about what we think it means for the industry, let's talk about how the opinions of an operator might be different from that of a consumer, or how different groups think of things differently. But if we could avoid offering up our own personal value judgments on vaccination one way or the other, I think we'll have a better conversation. So talk about anything that you see on screen or what you think it implies. But if we could avoid the, I believe vaccines are good, I believe vaccines are bad conversation, that would really be awesome. So as our little plug here says, let's keep it constructive. Okay, so with that in mind, we've been monitoring for a while consumers' trust of different places where you can get information about COVID and what you can do about it, and safety and vaccination. And I wanted to maybe just get your take first. Can you predict, or can you guess, which of these sources consumers trust the least for COVID safety information, vaccination, etc.? Mark, do you know the answer? You know the actual answer. Do you think that our audience here will generally have guessed that answer correctly?
I think that it's gonna be between two options here. And so I think that we're gonna finish, number one and number two will be correctly identified, but they may flip-flop one or two.
That's interesting. So in about 10 seconds, I'm going to ask you to tell me which are those two that you think they are. But I will tell you this, there is one that is running away with the vote right now. Like, it's not even close. It's not 1 and 2, it's 1 and then quite literally everything else. So I'm going to stop this poll. We've had several hundred votes already. What do you think 1 and 2 were, Mark?
I would think that they were going to guess either the president or the media. And I feel like, given given the day, the crowd might think one over the other. But I would guess that those two would be the two main choices.
Let's take a look. So it's media by like a tremendous tremendous margin, and then you have Congress and president sort of there, and then you have CDC, FDA, WHO, and then public health experts and scientists. But media by far, and I think that means we're pretty good at understanding what consumers think, because this is exactly what consumers say. I mean, I'll talk to the first point, and then maybe Mark, you could fill in some of the gaps for us. But this is the percentage of folks in green that completely trust that source for information on COVID safety. Just 13% say that of the media. A lot of people trust their doctor, and that number has not fallen over time, but the number for the media has just been abysmally low, just terrible. I don't know, Mark, if you have any other comments here.
Well, it's one of those things where I think it's a reflection of, we knew that our politics were polarized, but it's another kind of reflection of how nationalized they are too. In this case, I think that the news media is probably kind of the national sources, either the big newspapers or the cable news channels, kind of all of which have a perception of advocating for one side or the other, right? So I think that the longer that this drags on, and the more that certain media sources kind of cover it like a horse race, whether it's, what does this mean for one party over the other? And then, kind of just covering the numbers like they might, a stock market index. I think that grates on us after a while. And it does I think it does lead to some mistrust or cynicism.
It is interesting though, right? Like, it's obvious when you think about it, but it's not eminently obvious as you're just going about your day. But news organizations, they're private companies. They're there to make money, right? And we live in a world, especially with social media, where it's actually more profitable to get people onto a team. So it's probably not a surprise that, news stories will be very, very slanted in many cases in an effort to get you onto that team, so you sort of keep coming back, because it's all about revenue in the end. I don't know what the solution for that is, right? You don't want state-run media, but certainly I don't think you do. But so profit motive is what's there. I think we're sort of stuck with what we have. I don't know what a possible resolution is. Well, there's some interesting stats here if you look at the crosstabs. What do you see, Mark?
Well, so here's one where the trust in primary care doctors, I think it holds across gender and region. The one place where it kind of does differ a little bit is generationally, and then it's also reflected in the vaccination plan kind of cohort of people.
It's pretty stable though, right?
Fairly, but I think that you see the vaccine hesitant folks are just a little bit less trusting, probably not significantly so, but a little less trusting of a primary care physician, and so are Gen Z consumers. There's quite a bit of overlap between those two groups. I think that younger consumers are a little bit more likely to be vaccine hesitant, and then I think that a part of it might be the fact that I think that a lot of Gen Z consumers just may not really regularly see a primary care doctor. It kind of was one thing that I didn't really start doing a lot of until I was probably, in my later 20s. Yeah.
But generally fairly stable, versus if you would look at how people feel about other sources, like the president, our current president, for instance.
Yeah, totally polarized, as you would expect certainly by political party. And then that shows up, regionally, location, whether urban to rural, and it kind of maps onto vaccination status and plans as well a little bit.
Yeah, which sort of says, if the goal is to convince more people to get vaccinated, he may not be the best messenger, because those folks tend to not trust him as much as some other sources. How about something like the CDC?
CDC is skewing a little bit the same way. I wonder if that's just because the current administration in power right now, are the Democrats, and so I don't know if that means that we are perceiving the CDC to be influenced by or controlled by, one party over the other, but it's just sort of the folks with the authority right now over vaccine policy are kind of all in one party right now. So that might be why they are matching up a little bit. But, within generations, within genders, there isn't too much difference except for how we sort ourselves along the political party.
Yeah, I think there is some sentiment among some that some of our institutions may have been captured by forces that we don't want to have captured them, or that institutions have become politicized in some way, which may explain some of the split. But the news media one is really quite interesting too, and probably an extension of that. What do you see here? We see some pretty big variances.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, because I think that our media shows a little bit how much our politics have become nationalized. The fact that the trust is higher among consumers living in urban markets, a little bit higher among Northeast and West. So, here you have kind of these, coastal states that might have one view over another. And then, the mistrust in the media, I think, maps to mistrust of vaccinations kind of in general. So that bottom right chart there of vaccinations plans, what it just shows is that I feel like there's some correlation and causation here where, mistrust of what you're being told, mistrust of what you're hearing is, I think, what's causing a lot of folks to pause, wait for more information on making a vaccination plan, or kind of deciding against it entirely.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the insights here is that the messenger really matters, and perhaps even more so than the message in some cases. Mm-hmm. It totally, should make obvious intuitive sense that you'll see a big split on, based on your political party, whether or not you trust the president. But to see that same sort of split for do you trust the news media tells you that something much deeper is happening in our culture. What's interesting too is we've actually tracked these numbers for a while. So we go back to April of last year compared to these more recent numbers from just a couple of weeks ago. You could see that trust has declined in every single area other than for the president, because we had different president too at the time. So we're actually comparing two different things in that one line item. But across the board, we are trusting way fewer things, and much less so in each case than we were at the start of COVID. That makes it harder to get a message out, right? That people are going to latch on to and go with. This continues to trend down. I think, didn't we have like an intermediate period that we looked at and we saw a decline, and yet it declined yet again from there?
I think that's right. The declines from the first period to the second, which I think were at the end of 2020, and so still that was actually, I think, in our election coverage issue. So those were pretty heightened. But yeah, everything had kind of trended downward, and that continued through this past August. I just think that part of it is, even our experts have had some things wrong before, where the best available information that they had, we turned out to learn more later. And so we would go back, and they would go back and sort of tell us new guidance. And, I think that you're certainly allowed to be a little bit wrong when you're trying to figure out an evolving situation, but that can also lead to more distrust. Some folks might, sincerely believe that experts have been lying, but I think that more likely it's just that we keep learning more about this virus as it changes.
Yeah, again, many, many different opinions on this. And the reason that we're covering this is ultimately what happens moving forward if there's mandates put in place, if those actually end up moving forward, if that happens federally or at a local level. A lot of it's going to come down to how much people individually trust what's happening and what they hear. And I think our numbers show that relative to COVID, trust in all these types of message sources and institutions is actually at an all-time low. This is the lowest we've seen these numbers since the start of the pandemic, and it seems like they're not trending up at all in any of the intermediate data sets that we've had. So that's where trust is right now. And it's amazing that something, as seemingly innocent as this little vial over here could elicit so many intense reactions. And one way to look at this is just, what does vaccination actually look like, since essentially the vaccines have become available in a major way. So there's 4 lines over here, and I wanted to draw our attention to each one of them individually first. The green line is the percentage of Americans that are vaccinated. The yellow line is the percentage that say, I'm not vaccinated yet, but I plan to. And it would certainly make sense that as one line goes up, the other one goes down, because some people that plan to get vaccinated become vaccinated. The gray line are the percentage of folks that say, I'm not sure if I want to, but I would at least maybe give it some thought. And the pink line, those are the ones that say, yeah, I really don't think I'm going to do this, right? I'm pretty sure that I'm not going to get vaccinated. And when you first look, they say, oh, the good news is that you have an increasing green line that looks like it probably offsets decrease in the yellow line. But as you go a little bit deeper and you sort of, let's say, combine the lines, so you have one group that we'll call, let's say, vaccine enthusiastic. These are folks that either are vaccinated or say they plan to be vaccinated. And then you have, let's say, the vaccine hesitant, which are the folks that say, I don't plan on getting vaccinated, or I'm not sure. If you track these numbers over time, you see that other than maybe a moderate gain that we made between February and April, the numbers are pretty consistent. They haven't really changed, right? That group of the folks that we'd say in pink that are sort of more on the vaccine hesitant side of the aisle, that number has sort of stabilized. It's not shrinking. It doesn't seem like it's really growing, but it's not shrinking. And the vaccine enthusiastic at the same time, that number is fairly stable as well. So, it's been, 6 months or so since April, and we haven't really been able to budge this. So what it looks like is happening is the folks that plan to do this have been going ahead and doing it. And those that weren't really sure or they didn't want to, they just sort of said, yeah, I don't think I'm going to go there. And we haven't seen much movement. And if we ask people, well, why might you be hesitant to get vaccinated? There are actually a lot of reasons. And I think sometimes we'll come across like a news story that says, oh, the number one reason was this. So if we just address this one thing, then no one will have a reason to not want to get vaccinated anymore. But that's not actually what the data shows. The data shows there's a multitude of reasons that people have. And we can, again, I don't want to get into a conversation about the legitimacy of these reasons. I think that's not what today is about. But just know that these are the things that people are thinking, right? It's not just one thing and then nothing else matters. It's actually a confluence of things. I don't know, Mark, if you had any observations here that you wanted to share.
Sure. So the option there with 12% of I don't vaccinate against anything, including COVID, we tracked that for the first time in this most recent survey. We didn't ask that before, months and months ago. But what that says to me is that there isn't a huge, truly anti-vaccine position. It's more a position out there of uncertainty and skepticism, and not completely flat out rejection. I think that a lot of these reasons, I think, could be counteracted and might move some people from hesitant to likely to make a plan to get vaccinated. I think that there are certainly people who are dug in, but they're not, that was a smaller percentage than I was expecting of people being completely dug in and saying that they just don't do any vaccination at all.
Yeah, I think we made I think culturally, we as a society made a mistake just calling people anti-vax when that's not actually the case, right? It's 12% over here. It's 12% of the vaccine hesitant, which is something like, I think we said 35% or so. So that's like maybe 4% of the population when you really get down to it. And we're not saying that any of these other reasons are necessarily good reasons or bad reasons. They're just reasons that people have. But if these are reasons you have and someone says, oh, you're just an anti-vaxxer, you probably dig in a little bit more because you feel like you're being demonized in some way. Like that's not the reaction that you probably want to elicit, but it's the one that we've created in the conversation. So yeah, there are a number of reasons, and again, I would say the messenger is going to matter quite a bit too, not just the message. So we wanted to understand as well, hey, if you're vaccine hesitant, what if you weren't able to do these various types of things unless you actually got vaccinated? Would you reconsider your stance and get vaccinated as a result? Mark, can we start with that big giant number at the bottom?
Yeah, I mean, two-thirds of people won't be persuaded or convinced, if they can't go out and kind of do things that they normally did before COVID. So even if you were prevented from, going to the grocery store, being able to see somebody in the hospital, it's a small number of folks that would say that would be something that could convince them and get them off the fence. So
and we're not seeing particularly large numbers for any, and none of these things individually really move the needle that much. Collectively, you could say maybe they move 35% of the needle, right? The people that aren't in that 65%. But it seems like no one real individual thing does. It's funny, we sometimes talk about LTOs, and it's like, one sign of LTO success is, do more people order it on the menu? The better version of success is, will people actually go to the restaurant just to get that LTO? Yeah. Maybe we should start tracking, will someone get vaccinated if that's the only way they could order this item? That's a pretty high bar to clear, though, I would guess.
Not taking the bait there, Jack.
Yeah, don't take the bait. But I think, as you said, people are fairly well dug in, and we should ask ourselves, is the response that we're having and to their position something that just causes them to dig in more? And I think partially the answer is yes. So it's actually quite interesting. We drew two circles in this Venn diagram here. The blue circle on the left shows that 70% of Americans have already been vaccinated or say they definitely plan to. And then you have 84% of Americans that are very or somewhat concerned about COVID. These circles basically overlap almost completely, right? There aren't many people that are in one group and not in the other group. If you're concerned about COVID, there's a really good chance that you've already gotten vaccinated, right? You don't have a lot of people that are really concerned about COVID that haven't gone ahead and taken that step already. Conversely, if you've already been vaccinated, you're very, very likely to also have a strong concern about COVID. And the question is, what does this mean for the other proportions of the population? So on the left, we have a pie chart that says, hey, among those people in this country that are really concerned about COVID, what percentage of them are vaccinated versus not yet vaccinated? So the vaccinated is, we're defining it more broadly here. This is they've already been vaccinated or they plan to. And then the not vaccinated number are the people that are hesitant, that say they don't plan to or they're unsure. 85% of folks that are concerned about COVID are already in the vaccinated camp, or the pro-vaccine, I'm going to do it camp. Just 15% said they haven't. So that's largely sort of resolved itself in a way. Among those who are not concerned about COVID, you see precisely the opposite effect, right? Only 17% of them have gone ahead and gotten vaccinated. So as you would expect, this is just very sensible human nature. If you're really concerned about it, you're probably going to do something about it. If you're not as concerned about it, you may not be quite as likely to. And the question is, what messaging are we trying to achieve with our messaging right now? Which group are we trying to target? And do we think that message actually moves the needle? But we have essentially two different populations over here that have very differing opinions on the degree to which they're really concerned about COVID. And as we start rolling out with different things that we're expecting people to do in society, there are different, there's different levels of compliance that consumers say they're willing to have. So I wonder if you could take us through some of this, Mark, right? So if a restaurant that you normally like to go to wanted, some kind of COVID precaution to allow you in and eat there, would you be willing to comply with this? Or would you be likely to comply with this? Would you say, nah, I don't want to do that. I'm just going to get a meal to go or get it delivered instead. Would you leave but say, hey, that's no problem. I'll just come back some other time. I still like that restaurant. Or would you leave and say, I can't believe they asked me to do this. I may not want to even come back in the future. Let's talk about the different things that a restaurant might ask you to do.
Yeah, the fact that mask wearing is folks are most likely to comply with that makes sense. I mean, I think that it's among the less invasive things that people are asking of customers. All of these green lines here that we see, they've all increased a little bit compared with the month before. We asked at the end of July when the thoughts of vaccine requirements were still kind of getting steam. And the requirement to show proof of vaccination and be vaccinated, a month ago it was about 51%. It's now 56%. So it is inching up slowly. Kind of the realer the idea of it gets. But interestingly, also some of the red bars, the leave and consider whether you would ever return, those have also gone up a little bit. It's the kind of pink line there in the middle of leave, but kind of come back later. Those folks are getting off the fence. They're either deciding they will comply or not, and not ever again come back. And I was also a little bit surprised, but now it makes more sense the more that I think about it. Of why is there even less compliance for showing proof for a negative COVID test in lieu of being vaccinated and showing it?
You have to do something, right? You got to take a test all the time. It costs money. I mean,
yeah, it's a lot more
you got to stick something in your nose.
We had to get my kids' COVID tests to go back to school. And I called my kids off sick because they had colds. I didn't think it was COVID, but the school said nope, they can't come back until they have a negative PCR test. So they were out for 3 days of school each until we got those results.
Oh, that'd be PCR. It couldn't even be a rapid test.
No, it couldn't be rapid. They get rapid tested every week at school, but in order to come back, they had to have a PCR.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
How about compliance with these three different things based on your current vaccine status? This is really interesting.
Yeah, I think among the folks that are kind of, I guess, vaccine enthusiastic, they either already have their shots or they're planning on it. I think that it made sense to me that they would be much more open to complying with all these different things. But even those who don't plan to get vaccinated, the majority of them still will go along with a mask wearing mandate. So, I think there are very, very few things that worry people about wearing a mask. So at the very least, we can at least expect most of our customers to go along with something like that, even if we're not willing to kind of go all the way for a vaccine mandate.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really big gap, right? You don't see that much variance in the mask wearing, but you see big difference in whether you have to show a negative test or show proof of vaccination.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that means until this becomes normalized, restaurants that enact this, they may lose a portion of their customer base, because I think we saw some say, hey, not only would I not go in then, I may reconsider ever going back to that restaurant. But you probably get to a point where if every single restaurant is doing it, it's no longer like a differentiator, in your mind. So
yeah, but I think a lot of folks just don't want to be the first restaurant on the block to do that.
Yeah. Well, this is good. I lose stuff all the time, but I guess most people don't. Of people that have been vaccinated, 92% still have their vaccination card. I feel like that's a thing that's really easy to lose, but people have been holding on to it for dear life, I guess. I expected this number to be a little bit lower, but there are things that you could do to get like a duplicate copy. You could call, the Walgreens or the CVS, and they should be able to help you out. But it looks like people don't need to. For the most part, they still have it, and about 1 in 9 consumers that have been vaccinated have a mobile app currently that verifies their vaccine status. So we also did a look at what operators think about vaccination and mandates, and this was just published this week. I think yesterday or the day before, and wanted to deep dive a little bit into this. Again, you can pick this up in Report Pro if you're in the environment already. But here's some things that we learned. So we wanted to ask the operator. This includes both restaurants and on-site operators, meaning places like corporate cafeterias and hospitals and nursing homes and hotels and other places that serve food. Are they more concerned that they'd be likely to lose customers if COVID precautions were too lenient, or would they be more concerned about losing customers if COVID precautions were too restrictive? And between the two, operators said, I'm a little bit more, actually quite a lot more concerned about having precautions that are too restrictive by a pretty wide margin. 73% of operators say, you know what, that freaks me out more than having too lenient of a precaution that makes people think that my place is not safe. And if we look at how operators have sort of tracked their optimism against their ability to survive COVID, we have three lines over here. The yellow line are operators say, I'm worried about this, but I'm still fairly confident I'm going to make it out okay at some point. The green line is the best one. That's the one where operators say, I'm cautiously optimistic about this whole thing. I'm pretty positive about it. And the orange line are the folks that say, I'm really nervous about this. I'm not sure if I'm going to make it. So one thing I would note is going all the way back to the beginning of COVID, with the exception of a couple of spikes, we've seen essentially a downward erosion of that orange line. Not a lot of operators today that have made it this far still think that they're at a point where they may not just make it at all. So that's good news. We also saw a point where the green line crossed over the yellow line. That happened again earlier in the year, basically at a time when vaccines started to become available. And then we had a really nice gap between the green and the yellow over here in May, but then as we got into July and Delta started to hit, it started to reverse, but it never quite crossed over again. And it looks like we're again getting to a point where operators feel generally more optimistic. A majority, 52%, say I'm cautiously optimistic going forward. And hopefully we'll see that green versus yellow gap continue to grow. What about the ways that operators sort of work with vaccination right now? What can you tell us, Mark?
So far, very few people have a policy like that in place. That may change if other states kind of follow the lead of New York and Los Angeles and other big markets do. But for right now, it goes back to that slide from a couple slides ago where 3/4 of operators are afraid of appearing too strict in the precautions that they take. Because this ultimately comes down to personal choices of the customers. And so, if you're seen as, being a little bit more overbearing and, strongly encouraging or mandating a personal choice, I think sometimes that just kind of runs up against the idea of hospitality, right?
Yeah,
I think that a lot of operators are hesitant to do that.
Yeah, if you as a restaurant or another operator aren't being told that you have to mandate vaccination for customers, you're pretty unlikely to do it electively, right? Is sort of what this shows. And we want to understand from an operator, regardless of what their current business's policy is, just them as people, what policies do they personally support? And obviously some of their professional concerns are going to creep into this too as well. But you can sort of see at the top, and I don't know if Mark, you want to take us through this real quick, some of the ones we put arrows around. What are you seeing and what operators personally believe in?
Sure. Let's quickly touch on the fact that masks over vaccines, people are much more open to having rules in place for mask wearing. I think that makes a lot of sense. But as I look at the second arrow compared with the third and fourth, right now I think what we're seeing is that operators are a little bit more in favor of asking for some of these personal choices to be considered and made of their employees before they start thinking about that of their customers. For one thing, the employers have some authority to ask that of their employees, and then they have to keep in mind the long-term health of the business. So I think that's why they sort of are more open to that right now before they kind of go down the line of, well, what do I need to require of and ask of my customers?
Yeah, it seems, I think that's exactly right. They're much more likely to say, I do this to my staff before my patrons. They're very unlikely to want to force anything on their patrons. But even the 53% that say they personally, not necessarily professionally, but at least personally support having employees be vaccinated, um, that's barely a majority, right? That means you have 47% that are not in favor of that. And my guess is that they would be, fairly adamantly opposed to it because it is such a sensitive issue, just as the 53% are probably fairly adamant in their support of this too. So it will be interesting if things get passed down that will require this to happen. We'll talk about Biden's mandate in a little bit, but that's currently for businesses with over 100 employees. Most restaurants, for instance, are not.
Right.
So what would you do as an operator if you had to mandate vaccination for your customers? There's not a lot to see here other than, there's different ways an operator might go about this. Some say I would, want to make sure there's proof of both doses, and they had to be at least 2 weeks, past. Or they might say, hey, double dose, but I don't really need the 2-week parameter. Some say single dose is okay, but that's a smaller number. And then about 26% say, as long as you verbally confirm that you got vaccinated, I'll trust that. But verbal confirmation is a minority over here, as is single dose. So it looks like if they say, hey, this needs to happen, most operators are saying, if you're going to do that, I'm going to ask for something a little bit more bulletproof. Some headlines have emerged over the last, days, weeks, months. On the one hand, hey, New York vaccine mandate could destroy my restaurant. And then 2 days later, the vaccine mandate will not destroy your restaurant. So who knows? And I wanted to maybe get your take on on which opinion you think is right. So on balance, if consumers are mandated to be vaccinated to come into a food service business like a restaurant, would it help that business overall in terms of its revenue and profitability, or would it hurt that business overall in terms of its revenue or profitability? So it looks like we're starting to run that experiment now. I don't know when we'll have enough data that we could actually have a conclusive answer on this. But what do you guys think? Do you think it's going to be a 50-50 vote here? Is it going to be 80-20 in one direction? If we asked everyone to also indicate their current belief system around vaccination, do you think that would be predictive of which way they're voting as well? I don't know.
No, actually, I think no matter how you personally believe about vaccination, I think thinking about the operator and thinking about businesses, I think it would still swing relatively heavily in one direction over the other.
Yeah, so let's take a look.
Vary by area.
That's very possible as well, right? And I'm going to just end this poll a little bit early. We have several hundred responses already. So this is what we think, at least in this webinar. Pretty close to a 50-50 split. And we actually asked a very similar question about a month ago, and it was still about 50-50 then, although I think it was more 50. I think it was a slight majority saying help back then. Now we have a slight majority saying hurt. And we asked operators sort of the same question, right? So vaccinations were required for your consumers to eat at restaurants and other food establishments. Would it help your business? Would it hurt your business? Are you not sure? The not sures are there, but let's look at those that have an opinion one way or the other. It is a pretty resounding, I guess, win for those folks saying, well, not win. Many more people said it would hurt their business than help by a factor of 2.7 times. 49% said a mandate would probably hurt their business because there'd be fewer customers available to come in, versus 18% saying that it would help their business because customers would feel safer dying out. This is a dynamic number though, right? You could imagine that as the vaccinated population grows, to the extent that it does, then the claim that there would be fewer customers available, that becomes weaker and weaker over time. At the same time though, what does vaccination actually mean, right? If efficacy rates drop, or are we talking about you have to have a third and fourth booster at some point? Are some who are vaccinated now no longer in the calculus for what a vaccinated person will be in the future if they haven't been, let's say, boosted? So it's flowing and it's dynamic. And you could see these same numbers broken out by different types of operators, restaurant operators versus on-site. Again, that's, hospitals, nursing homes, hotels, B&I, colleges, K through 12, et cetera. And then retail food service, which are places like C-stores and the prepared food section of a grocery store. In each case, the operator is more likely to think that a mandate would hurt their business than help it. And in particular, those retail food service places, which again, lean heavily toward convenience stores and to some extent grocery prepared food, it's a much wider margin even than that. It's a 57-6 swing. So this was interesting, right? So if a mandate exists that you have to be vaccinated to eat in a restaurant, which is the case in New York City, LA County, and San Francisco, and perhaps other areas soon. We'll see if Chicago goes that way at some point. 72% of operators say that they don't actually have adequate staff and resources to enforce a customer vaccine mandate. I think there's been some criticism about, okay, even if you like the idea, it's really hard to actually implement in practice. And operators are saying, like, we don't even have the staff to do our normal stuff, right? We had to shut down an entire day part because I can't find enough workers. We've probably all been to a restaurant at some point in the last month or so where there's been a sign on the door saying, we now close at 7 p.m. Which is like, that's a pretty early dinner, right? That you got to be done by 7 because we only have people working from 11 to 7 because we only afford one shift of employees because we can't find anybody else. So if you're struggling already with what your staff can do for just your current business, giving them yet another task like enforcement, a lot of operators say, I just don't have the people to do that right now. We have the announcement that the Biden administration made. I think it's probably been like a week now around vaccination for businesses with over 100 employees. Again, most independent restaurants don't fall into that camp, but does that order get expanded at some point? Do local governments sort of do their own thing and widen it? So you see, headlines, hey, West Hollywood require vaccinations for indoor diners and for restaurant workers, and this goes into effect in 3 weeks from now or something. Mm-hmm. Restaurants grapple with vaccine mandate policies in historically tight labor market at the same time. So what is going to end up being the case? Well, if you look at the stats today, only about 21% of operators currently have a policy where their staff must be vaccinated to work there. We saw that roughly 53% of operators personally support having employees be vaccinated, but in its current state, only 21% of operators at their operation currently have that policy in place already. You have another 35% that say they're considering it, and then you have a whole bunch of operators saying, no, I just don't think this is something that we would consider doing. So if that's the case, and you want to take that number from 21% up to 100%, let's say by mandate for operators that fall into those groups, or the business is big enough, or the local government said, hey, this has got to be something that happens at all restaurants, for instance, that is a pretty steep hill to climb. And the question becomes just, can restaurants and other places do it? And also, how would they respond if that's the case? So we're going to look at a piece of consumer data here real quick, which is if this type of business, right, required their employees to be vaccinated, would you be more likely to support that business, less likely to support it, or would there really be no difference at all? And this actually really surprised me. Like, I thought, typically when things happen, people say, oh, when something happens, unless it really negatively affects me, I would generally view it as something positive, and I might be a little bit more likely to support that business. Here it's really balanced, right? If sit-down restaurants required employees to be vaccinated, yes, you'd have 36% of consumers saying I'd be more likely to support that restaurant. But you have a pretty big population of consumers saying, nope, I am crossing that restaurant off my list now because they're doing something that doesn't agree with my personal value system. And that sort of ratio holds fairly evenly and true across all these different types of businesses as well. So on balance, the more likely to support number tends to be a little bit higher, although it's not true of bars, sports bars, lounges, and stadiums and arenas for some strange reason.
Underwater for gyms too.
Yeah, underwater for gyms as well, and almost the theme parks, right about there for theme parks. But this one, there's actually a decent sized population of people saying, hey, if a business does this, and particularly probably if a business does this electively, right? I think people recognize like, hey, this is, a forced mandate. There's not much you could have done about it. But if you choose to go ahead and do this yourself and it's publicized, there will be a population of consumers that say, I don't know if I want to continue supporting that business the way that I previously did. So we are, we started off this conversation showing how split we are in many ways, and it really bears out in consumers' intent around behavior. And we've talked for a while now about the labor shortage and just how it's impacted things, and this is what operators tell us, right? 40% of operators say that mandatory employee vaccination is important enough to risk a staffing shortage, right? I'm willing to risk that maybe some of my staff will quit or leave even in a tough labor market, versus 60%, a larger number, saying, you know what, the labor shortage is just too big of a risk right now. I can't risk any employees maybe quitting because they oppose mandatory vaccination. So that's where we are. And who knows what's going to roll out as national or local policy in the weeks and months ahead. But if there is a push to say, hey, everyone that works in a restaurant needs to be vaccinated, or everyone that goes into a restaurant as a visitor needs to be vaccinated, there will probably be some considerable amount of opposition, not just from the individuals, but from the business as well. And I think we're starting to see some of that, there's lawsuits and stuff happening already. But that is what the data shows. I wanted to end this section on just one quick question for you all, which is, what do you think? In 1 year from today, do you think you will need to be vaccinated to fly commercially in the US? This is not to do with restaurants, but I'm just curious to see what people think the future holds. What do you guys think? I don't care if you bias the results on this one. Mark, Claire, do you think a year from now you could fly unvaccinated, or will that no longer be an option?
I can't see the airlines mandating that, but I could see, the FAA or the administration.
Yeah. So you vote yes, Claire?
I vote yeah.
Yeah.
And Claire, you think that will be the world we live in as well?
I mean, I can't see the airlines doing it, but I feel like someone will make such a mandate.
So 2/3 of us think that is what'll happen. So I guess we'll check back in a year and see if we were accurate or not in this prediction. Okay, so Claire, I feel like we may have to. We brought Claire on to talk about something that was very positive, which is innovation and inspiring new ideas and bringing things onto the menu, which is an important topic. We ran out of time. Claire, so that we have the right audience, would you mind if we maybe push this until our next session and give it the time it deserves?
Yeah, that sounds good. Maybe we can even add in some more inspiration beyond.
We'll add in some more stuff, because ultimately it's about having great food, and we have some thoughts on how to do that. So again, we have another webinar in 2 weeks, every Thursday at noon Central. Thank you for being in and commenting and sharing thoughts on a fairly controversial topic and keeping it very constructive. And if you haven't had a chance yet, check out Report Pro. There is a ton of great stuff in there. And we have, again, new content almost every day that's helpful for your business. If you want to reach out to us and you're not doing business with Datassential already, just email us at hello@datassential.com. Otherwise, thank you.